Okay, my name is Phil Goyette, and I'm coming to you today to show you a prototype of a board game design I'm working on. The name of the game is Empires of the Millennium, and it is a 6-player historical area control game that's inspired by the Coin Counterinsurgency series that was initially designed by Volko Ruhnke and available from GMT Games. And it's also inspired by an old school game called Empires of the Middle Ages. That's a game, an old SPI game designed by Dunnigan and Red Simonson. But that was an area control game that actually used cards. It was a card-driven game, one of the first ones. And this game's card-driven as well. And its name is sort of an homage to the old Empires of the Empires of the Middle Ages game. It's also my first video ever making something like this, so bear with me. I might get a little rambly. But the goal here is to show you some features of the design and kind of what I'm going for, and to see if there would be some interest in people playtesting once I get a digital playtest kit together for the game. All right, so really the first inspiration for the game came from Tom Holland's book, Millennium. When I read the book, I thought, wow, this would make a very interesting coiny style game, although it's not exactly a coin game, because while there will be counterinsurgency happening all over the map in the game, none of the playing factions are going to be insurgent factions. Rather, you'll play as a faction, but you'll have the ability to diplomatically trigger neutral or NPC factions. Those are all the kind of natural colored cubes. I don't know why getting feedback on the video. Natural colored cubes there will be neutral factions, and anybody can trigger them and use them to do actions during the game. And they're also going to be kind of sources of conquest for the empires, and they can develop throughout the game. You can add more cubes. There's a number of events which impacts the neutrals. So while it's not properly a counterinsurgency game because there's no controlling faction and no insurgent factions and no counterinsurgent factions, there is insurgency that's going to happen within the game. So I read Tom Holland's book. It was excellent. If you have any interest in what he calls the Dark Ages, what I would call maybe the early Middle Ages, or the period of world history really following the downfall of Rome, it's a great starting point. I can't remember if it's a Mark Herman idea, but every game needs to have a thesis, right? And so my thesis from the research I've done is that during this time period, there were a number of empires which vied for control of this portion of the world. None of them succeeded in controlling all of it. And part of the reason for their failures was that as the empires expanded, they didn't have the administrative capacity to hold the empires together. So a feature was that the more centralized your empire was at this time, the easier it was to grow. So if you think of like the Umayyad Caliphate and dynasty that came following the death of the Prophet Muhammad and spread throughout the Middle East, North Africa, all the way to Spain, through a very centralized structure. But because they were so centralized, it also was harder to hold them together. And when the empire got too big, it basically outstripped its administrative capacity and made it vulnerable to other expanding empires during the time. And that should happen during the game. So there should be ebbs and flows of the different empires in the game. That's contrasted to something like, we'll go up to Ireland. I live in Dublin now. I'm an American that currently lives in Dublin. But the Irish at this time were extremely decentralized. They were actually just a sort of collection of chiefdoms with no real high king. And because of that feature, Ireland was extremely difficult to conquer and take over at this time. and for a long time thereafter. So the more centralized you are, the better you were at expanding. The less centralized you were, the harder it was to conquer you, right? So that's sort of the thesis of the game. Every game needs a thesis. That's mine. Here's some books I've read after the Millennium to do my research, in case you'd be interested in any of these. Empires of the Normans is on top. It's by Levi Roach. It's a relatively new book, and I put it on top because I'm still working on that one. I'm about halfway through it. But here's a kind of overview. I tried to at least get one book taking a viewpoint of one of the empires you can control in the game. And so that's probably a nice segue to just talk about the different empires that you can control in the game. So, each empire... Well, all right, so the game begins at the time when Charlemagne comes to control the kingdom of the Franks. He inherits his father's throne. And the Abbasid Revolution is underway in the Middle East as the Abbasid dynasty is working to push the Umayyad dynasty out of the caliphate and become in control of the Islamic world such as it exists at the time. So that's a starting point. The end point, and it's approximately mid-8th century, the end point of the game will be the First Crusade, which took place around the year 1100. So you're going to get 300 to 400 years of history in this game. It goes over the course of 8 epics, right? So each epic is like 50-ish years long. And within each epic, each faction is going to have a leader. And that leader is going to have certain attributes, which will affect how that faction can play during the epical period. Each epic is going to be 12 cards, 12 event cards, 12-ish event cards long. And I'm also hoping to have each epic playable as a standalone scenario. So there'll be 24 total event cards for each epic, so you'll get a random 12 each time, so the game will be different every time that you play it. But also, if you want to just drill down and look at the time period, for example, that we're going to start with, where Charlemagne comes to the throne of the Franks and is trying to expand the Frankish Empire and also unite with the papacy and Latin Christianity to make sort of a European Christian empire. And that's all you care about, you can just play that scenario, for example. The grand campaign is going to be the whole shebang, 8 epics worth. 12 cards per epic. So, okay, so you can see there's different leaders. Now, this is all kind of a work in progress, but there's different leaders for each epic. And then each leader has his own card for the epic. So when you're playing the game, and if you're playing as the Franks, Franks will be the first faction. Your leader for the first epic will be Charlemagne. You'll see he has a military rating of 3, an administrative rating of 10, a muster rating of 2. So military rating relates to how many dice he throws in battle. Administrative relates to how many areas he can administer effectively on the map. And muster relates to how many new military units he can draw with his muster action. And then each leader tends to have some kind of special rules that apply just to them. So, for example, if Charlemagne has the papacy aligned with him, he gets to reroll one of his d6 he throws on campaign, which is one of his military actions. And then each leader below will have victory points that are obtainable at the end of the epic. So these are sort of like goals for each faction to pursue. Charlemagne's are, he wants the papacy aligned. That gains a victory point. He wants Frankish control of 11 or more areas. He wants, that little symbol is the Latin Christian religion in 14 or more areas. He wants 2 or more bases, which are kind of like cultural or economic achievements on the board. And he wants his economy over 10 bucks at the end. So at the end of the epic, you'll go through the tally and then you'll add each of those to his potential victory points. You keep those going throughout the game. Whoever has the most victory points at the end of the game wins. There is an automatic victory condition to keep things spicy. And the automatic victory condition is if your faction controls 3 of the key areas on the map. The key areas or city areas are Baghdad, Constantinople, not Istanbul yet. Jerusalem. Cordoba, as we would call it, Cordoba. And then Cairo. Now, Cairo doesn't become a victory city until the Fatimid player faction creates Cairo, because they were the builders of Cairo, the city. I put Fustat on the map. Al-Fustat was kind of the precursor to Cairo, but Cairo was a much bigger undertaking, sort of like how Baghdad was also built at this time. So anyway, the Fatimids can build Cairo, and then that becomes a victory city once they've built it. So it's sort of like a Fatimid starting point once they get expanded on the map. So if you can control 3 of those at the same time, which is going to be very difficult to do, then the game at the end of that epic will end. Otherwise, you're playing for victory points. And it's victory point salad. And the victory points are going to be like goals that you get on your leader card each epic. Okay, so the factions are the Franks. They'll have Charlemagne as the leader in the first epic. Then you've got the Abbasids. That's my logo's trying to be like a little black flag of the Abbasid Empire. They'll have Al-Mansur and Harun al-Rashid, sort of like the early Abbasid caliphs, to start their first epic with. This is the Umayyad dynasty under Abd al-Rahman I. The Umayyads are sort of up against the wall at the beginning of the game. So during this time period, they are essentially pushed all the way back to Spain as the Abbasids push across the former empire of the Umayyads. Then you have the Byzantines. The Byzantines start under the iconoclasts. So there was essentially a civil war, a religious civil war taking place in the Byzantine Empire at this time between iconoclasts and iconophiles. Iconophiles eventually went out. So when you think of Orthodox Christianity and you think of orthodoxy, you picture the icon of the saints as sort of a centering place for your prayers. At this time, the iconoclasts were removing those. They believed that it was a sin to depict those type of things. Part of it came from the Muslim belief at the time that it was a sin to depict people in paintings. Anyway, the iconoclasts lose out, but because of the state of the civil war that's going on at the beginning of the game, they cannot campaign. So they can't wage military campaigns in the first epic because the empire simply isn't in a position to do it. Not unified enough. And then you have who I'm calling the Norse, or the Normans, or the Northmen, or the Vikings, with the triangle symbol of Odin. Siegfried will start as their leader, and they're going to start in the base of Scandinavia, and they're going to be the fun explorer faction that by the end of the game is going to be all over the map. So those are your 6 factions for the, sorry, one more faction. Forgot you guys. The Fatimids are the eventual rivals to the Abbasids for the Caliphate. At the beginning of the game, the Fatimids are sort of an underground. They're an underground religious movement. So they are limited early, and they are slowly building their position for when they want to start their revolt against the Abbasids. So those are the 6 factions to start the game with. And here are the symbols I'm using in my handwritten prototype. But you can see there's obviously the factions, neutral, and then the 6 playable factions. And then there's the religious control symbols that you'll see throughout the game. So the pagan, each area will be in some sort of religious condition, from pagan, Christian, Muslim, and then once Christian, the location can become Orthodox or Latin or go back to mixed Christianity. Same thing with the Muslim locations. Eventually, further along in the game, the Shiite-Sunni split really hasn't happened at the start, but it will happen. And the Shiite and Sunni factions can work to flip areas which are under Muslim majority. So in general, the religious control refers to situations where the majority of that population in that area adhere to a certain religion. If there's no control marker, which there aren't a lot, especially like North Africa, the Umayyad dynasty wasn't super concerned with spreading the Muslim religion down to every member of society. So a lot of the Umayyad controlled areas at this part of the game are actually mixed, where there's no counter. If there's no counter on the space, the religion is mixed. If we go up north, in the land of the pagans, where the Norse are going to be escaping Scandinavia, and the Slavs and the old German Wends are still holding their pagan rituals and drinking goat's blood and all that good stuff. The pagans are represented with the classic pentagram. And the pagan is sort of, the marker's a block. So to start converting Poland, for example, Polsk, you will your first religious conversion will take the pagan counter off the space, at which point it will become mixed. And then your next conversion will put a Christian counter down on the space. And then your next conversion after that would change it to Latin or Orthodox Christianity, for example. So it's an area map. Each area, we'll go back to Poland. I don't know why I put Polotsk. It was on some old map I was looking at. I don't have my naming conventions down yet. But this is modern day Poland. And it was like the kingdom of the Poles at the time. And they were pagan. And you can see that each area has a name. The counter with the pagan symbol shows the current religious alignment of the area. The number 1 is the economic value of the area. You have 0 to 3 economic value areas, which you will earn income from at the end of your epic. And then the letter C is just my stand-in right now for the communications level, or sort of the terrain of the area. A, B, or C. A in this time period essentially means there are some roads. B is wild. C is next to unpassable. So I think at this time, to go from like the Kingdom of Bohemia to go visit the Saxons is a trip that would take like a month. So a lot of the area is very wild. You can improve communications in different areas as part of the game. They impact the game in a number of ways. But those are the key features of kind of what's going on in the map. And then you see the poles have 2 cubes. So cubes are representing the military power of neutral Poland. You'll see we've got different colored cubes. Blue cubes are the Franks, so those are their military power, or even if you think about it, it's really the violence power. So these are the men that Charlemagne could rely on to conduct violence on his behalf for the sake of the empire. So cubes are military, cylinders are soft power. These are diplomats, these are religious functionaries, these are sort of like extended dynastic families, so you can spread cylinders through marriage. So soft power, and they could be used in a number of ways around the map. And when they're used, like any other good coin game, I'm in Moravia there, we'll go in Poland. If we wanted to use our Polish soft power, you'd flip it over, and the dotted side just means it's been activated for the turn, just like in any other coin. Right now, the economy, each faction is going to start with the same $20 to start the game. That's going to get tweaked as we play test, but for now I'm just using 20 as my baseline, and then everybody starts with no victory points. There is a papacy track and a caliphate track, and every faction has the ability to jump from either Rome or the location of the caliphate at the time, and it starts out in Syria, and can jump to the track and push the caliphate around to either helpful to the faction that's aligned with the caliphate or the papacy, or into crisis. And then if it's in crisis, you have the potential for an anti-caliphate, an anti-caliph to take over, or an anti-pope. So there's lots of playing that can happen on there. Generally, the Abbasids want the caliphate, the Franks want the papacy, and they get benefits for controlling them. So that track will be a part of the game. And you have lines of communication are not quite the same as you would see in a typical coin game. They're generally the major rivers. They are navigable. You can put your cubes or your cylinders onto them to march with. And it's the Dnieper is going to be key for the Norse who move east and are establishing the Great Rus or the Kievan Rus. In what's now France, what at the start of this game I'm calling West Francia, you'd have like the Seine, for example, which became a major target for Norse raids. Same thing going on in England. We've got the Trent and the Thames, which were getting hammered all the time. Dublin's got the Liffey. So locks are sort of soft targets for raids in the game, I think is the best way to put it. Over in the Middle East, there's the Silk Roads and the Hajj route. So these are non-river lines of communications, the only two in the game. There were no real road lines of communications at this time, but the Hajj route was extremely important, especially if you were the Caliph and or if you were targeting for raiding purposes, a very valuable route. Same thing with the Silk Roads heading east. Hugely valuable. Probably obviously the most valuable location in the whole game, I would say. The map itself stretches from the Persian Gulf in the bottom right corner all the way up to Iceland, Greenland, Vinland, or Newfoundland. But it's what the Vikings referred to as Vinland in the Voyages of Eric the Red. So the Norse are able to explore all the way to North America in the game and earn victory points as a part of that. And you can see spreading out from the Scandinavian countries are a number of, right now there's lines with arrows and a little number in the circle, but they are shipping lanes or ship-bound lanes where your cubes can travel across and raid, potentially make landings. And the number denotes the difficulty. So you roll a dice against the number in the sea lane to determine whether the raid or the voyage itself was successful. So they've got to leave Scandinavia to get to Iceland first is a voyage that succeeds on 1 to 4. Iceland to Greenland's a 1 to 3, and Greenland to Vinland's a 1 to 2. And those are all over the map. Down in the Eastern Mediterranean, those are going to be very important points for the Abbasids in particular, but also the Fatimids, and even the Umayyads at some times, to strike the Byzantine or other rich areas with raids. Piracy, really, at this time. Yeah, the map itself, I simply traced over a World in Flames 5th edition map to get the general outlines. I've since learned a bit more about projection systems and realized that the projection system used in the World in Flames game is not what I want for this game. So anyway, this is a version 1 map that I need to make a version 2 map. But the idea is to tilt the map so that Ireland sits in the top left corner, hopefully freeing up a lot more space in the bottom right corner where a lot of action is going to take place in the Middle East and Arabian Peninsula and Persia, right? So that's the map. I did the symbology. There's a couple handwritten charts I'm working through now, which will eventually become player aids. So I'm working my way through those. But then we get to the funnest part, which are the event cards. And if you love playing coin games, you know that great feeling when the new event card flips up and you say, ooh, what can I do with this one? So here's how the event cards will work in the game. I've drawn the first 3, so there are always going to be 3 cards visible to start the turn. And each faction will be randomly assigned an order. This is the sequence of play. It's going to be a little, to make a 6-player sequence of play took a decent bit of work, and I'm not sure that I have it pinned down exactly yet, but I think I'm getting close. But here's a sequence of play. Those are the 3 cards for factions to plan for passing purposes. And how it works is there are 12 cards taken out of the epic deck, and then an epic card, which is like the campaign card or the propaganda card in other coin games, what is sort of like the end of turn reset card. The epic card seated within the last 3 cards of the epic that you're playing. At least for now, that's how it's working. So you can randomly get between 9 and 12 cards each epic that come out. You'll see the epic card come down the draw pile as well. So you'll be able to plan for it ahead of time. There won't be the surprise end of turn that you have in some other coin games for various reasons. So anyway, this is how the sequence of play works. I think I'll probably do a separate video to show how the sequence of play works, what sort of your options are on your turn as a faction, and how the event cards work with your options. But anyway, this is it. Empires of the Millennium. I am diligently working away on it. Got over 200 event cards created. I think it's very playable as a game right now, so my next goal is really to get it made into a digitally playable game so I can get other people to start testing it or playing around with it, and so I can start iterating on some of these ideas with other people before I get too deep into a design and have to throw a bunch of stuff out. So if you have any interest, let me know. Or if you just want to follow along on YouTube or Twitter, I'll try to post videos of myself working through the game and playing some tests and some sample turns. Thank you very much.